Right. So from that analysis, now we are moving into a new topic called elasticity, which is also coming under market analysis and important in some of the production decisions making, as well as some of the other decisions like tax and subsidies. Right. So under elasticity, we will be looking at two major types of elasticities. The first one is the demand elasticity, and the second is the supply elasticity. So, like supply and the demand analysis we discussed, we will be having elasticity of demand as well as elasticity of supply. Then when we take the elasticity of demand, we will be getting into three types of elasticities of demand. The first one is the price elasticity of demand, the other one income elasticity of demand, and the cross elasticity of demand. So don't worry, we will be coming into those discussions later, but we will be going into these different types of elasticity because we as we discussed in the demand curve, when we defined the demand curve, we were discussing about the factors that affect on the demand. Right? It may be its own price or maybe some other factors like taste, consumer income, prices of other goods and services, and so on. So therefore, what we are going to do, we are going to change some of these variables and see the impact on either on demand or the supply. So therefore, we will be having different elasticities be discussing in this. So then let's start with the first one, as we said, the price elasticity of demand. Right. What do we mean by elasticity? Oh, simply when you hear the word elastic, which is familiar in our day-to-day life. When we say elastic, what does it mean? We say, just for joke, when I start my teaching, or sometimes when I get a topic, let's say we started about the present scenario of the economic crisis or something with economic crisis. So I will not stop it. So like keeping it on and on and on and again. And it's getting dragged. So that is what we simply say elastic. That is also quite similar what we discussed with economics, because we gave some, hit there. That hit got the response. You may ask, how can we link this discussion to the present economic scenario? Then I will be discussing all this. That is the response. Or the common elastic that we know, right? When we get our cloth, we have the elastic there. So there what we do some pressure. And if we put some pressure or some impact from both sides, then it gets expanded. That is elastic. The same way in economics, when we say elasticity, there what we are trying to do, we are trying to get the response of demand when we get into the demand elasticity. So we are looking at the response of demand due to change of some of the factors that I just mentioned. When we take the demand function, there are several factors that affecting on the demand. And out of them, we can change one. Let's take, for example, like its own price. So we can change its own price with certain proportion or percentage. Then we are looking at what's happening for the quantity demanded. That is the response of demand. Right? Therefore, in demand elasticity, we are looking at the response of quantity demanded. Specifically, if we are looking at the price elasticity of demand, there what we are trying to do, we are trying to see the response of quantity demanded due to its own price. You can see here, the important one, this one. Response of quantity demanded due to a change in its own price. So that is known as price elasticity of demand, because price is the variable that change. We learn under demand function, price is a factor that affects on quantity demanded. Therefore, when we change its own price, there will be a response. Right? But in elasticity, it is not just the response, it is the percentage change, how the magnitude of response. So we say percentage change in the quantity demanded due to a corresponding percentage change in its own price. So there will be some percentage change in its own price. So then we have the response with some magnitude. For example, you will be having 5% change in its own price. So price will be changed by 5%. Then what we are looking at, specifically we are looking at what is the percentage response. Because price change will make some response from the quantity demanded. Then we are asking what is the percentage change in the response. 10%, 5% change in its own price will make 10% change in quantity demanded. Since we know the demand flow, we can put it like this in a concrete way, like 5% increase in its own price will decrease the quantity demanded by 10%. So that is the percentage response. That is what we are going to do with the elasticity, and specifically on the price elasticity of demand. So we are now going to discuss on the price elasticity of demand, and later we will come into the other types like cross elasticity and income elasticity. Since this is price elasticity of demand, the only thing can happen is the change in its own price. That we learned it previously, right? So we know that is a movement along the demand curve. When we talk about the price elasticity of demand, it is a movement along the demand curve. We had one point, then we move into another point. Like we were in point A, now what we are going to do, we are going to move to point B in the same demand curve. We are having the same demand curve and 2 points in the demand curve. So we are moving from point A to point B, and then we are asking the question, when we wanted to move from point A to point B, what is the change required in its own price? So price may be 5% change. Then we are looking at what is the response in quantity. So we can see the same demand curve and get the different point in the quantity. So therefore, remember, when we talk about the price elasticity of demand, it is moving along the same demand curve. Then as I said, price elasticity of demand is the response. Right? Response of quantity demanded due to its own price. That response, the magnitude of the response depends on several reasons. In a real world, there are different magnitudes. There are different magnitudes that depends on several reasons. For example, we have a definition like necessary good and luxury good. Right? Necessary goods is like absolutely required good, like food. Food is necessary. If we get little bit down, let's say rice. Rice is a necessary good. Vegetable, it's a necessary. Medicine, it's a necessary. So these are really required for our life. So depending on the type of this definition, when we say necessary, of course, there will be a minor change. You may get the very best example today, what we are experiencing today. Now you see the fuel prices. If you take petrol, gas, diesel, and then kerosene, all these. What about the prices? Let gas the other side. Let's take petrol and diesel. The prices are, 400 times increase. It's not double, it's 4 times increase. But can you see that the long queues that we are having on the cities is vanished? It is not. Right? Prices are increased, but quantity demanded is not decreased. People still demand maybe the same or little less than the amount they demanded previously. If you take petrol sheds, the price was 137. So let's say we had 1 million barrels demanded per day, but now price increased to 420 or 450. What has happened to the quantity demanded? Has it decreased to 5 million barrels? No, if it was 10 million barrels, still we are demanding 10 million barrels or bit closer to 10 million barrels. So because petrol, right, we say energy is a requirement in this society, which is an absolute requirement. We need it. We have no excuse. If you take rice, we have the same response. If you take sugar, we have the same response. But if you take the items that we take like luxuries, those are not necessaries, absolute requirement, but if you have them, you know, your happiness will be much higher than having those necessary goods. And you can show to other people about your wellness. For example, let's say motor cars. Motor cars are luxuries. Of course, now in the present scenario, it has become a necessary even for any family. But for the moment, let's say this is a luxury. Then what happens when the price increase? When the price increase, counter demanded definitely decrease more than the change in the price. Right? So the best example these days are the cement. The house building is a luxury. You can have a small house and just be in the house. But if you want to have a bigger house, that become a luxury. So luxury houses. The building of luxury houses are now getting decreased because the cement prices significantly increase. The contractors, they decrease the demand for that because their clients or the consumers, they decrease the demand. So therefore, depending on the type of the good that we are discussing, it may be a luxury, it may be a necessary. Depending on the type of the good, the response may change. Because of that, elasticity may change. We will discuss that later when we do this with a graph. So then you will be getting a bit more idea about that. But remember, depending on the type of the good that we are discussing, the response may change. And also, if you are having close substitutes, when we are having close substitutes, we discuss what are the substitutes previously, so I'm not going to discuss that now. But you know what are the substitutes. So when we are having close substitutes, then the response may be changed. If we are not having closer substitutes, then response will have different values. You take the case like bread. So we have a substitute for bread, that is rice. So what happens when bread prices increase? We had the increase in rice, but quantity demanded did not decrease that much. But now bread prices increase also because wheat flour prices increase. Then what happened to the quantity demanded for bread? It significantly decreased. Maybe 10% increase in bread prices decrease 50%, 60% quantity demanded decreasing its demand. That simply says when bread prices increase, the response for that will be a huge decrease in quantity demanded. The reason for that, we have a substitute. When we are having a close substitutes, then response will be very high, either positively or negatively. In this case, because we are looking at the price elasticity of demand, therefore, when price increase by 10%, quantity demanded will be decreased by 30-50%. That is because it is having a close substitute. But if you are not having a close substitute, just take the case like my petrol. When price increase, why we are demanding still the same amount of petrol? Of course, if I am having a vehicle, I had brought previously, which use petrol. Now petrol prices increase, but can't help. To go anywhere, I need that petrol. I cannot put water and go on my vehicle. Right? Therefore, there is no close substitute for petrol. Of course, we have for diesel, we have the biogas, which is also a closer substitute, but not available. If we are having biogas in this country, of course, people will get to the use of biogas. But we don't have biogas available in the country. Therefore, when the diesel prices increase, still we demand the same amount of diesel because all the diesel vehicles will be used in the diesel. And we can do the conversion to the LPG, liquid petroleum gas, but LPG availability also questionable at present. Therefore, we will not be doing the conversion for that, for even for a petrol vehicle. Right. So anyway, what the point that I want to highlight here is that when we are having closer substitutes, of course, the response will be different. And the definition of the market, we discussed this previously. The way we define the market, like let's say, if you take medicine, drugs, right? So when we take medicine, it's become kind of absolute necessary. Therefore, when the medicine price increase, let's say the paracetamol, when paracetamol prices increase, on average, all the prices of paracetamol increase, then response may be a bit higher. So, of course, we may not be able to decrease as much as we want, but still, when we say medicine, the response will be a bit higher, but a bit lower because we need that amount of medicine, right? We will decrease, but not as we want. So maybe like price may be increased by 10%, quantity demanded will not be decreased by 10%. It will be less than that because we cannot make that much of response. But if you take a particular brand, right, paracetamol of X, company X, then the definition of the market is for that, only for that particular type of paracetamol. Then price will be increased of that particular type of paracetamol, the brand X. Then what happens? People will get into some other brands. So market will be getting enlarged. So people will be moving away from this. So response will be high. Therefore, the way we define the market also has some impact on the response. And finally, the time horizon, the time that we are discussing. If we may take, that can be interpreted in different two ways. The first one, if you take a shorter period of time, let's say we take again the petrol case. For a shorter period of time, there will be a bigger response. When price increase for 1 week, 2 weeks, people will at least to try to minimize the consumption. The people, those who can walk, they will walk. And the people, those who can get together and travel, they will get together and travel. They will start using public vehicles. Therefore, when there's a fuel price high, people will start decreasing the consumption to some extent, at least. But what do you think after 2-3 weeks? Then people will get adjusted and will consume the same. So response will not be there at all. So the best example for this is maybe our gents may have some ideas. If we take alcohol, what happens? Every budget, the government put a huge tax on alcohol. So alcohol prices significantly increase. What happened to the consumption? At least for 2 weeks or 1 month, there will be a huge response. Or people will say, no, we are not going to buy it, and so on. So there will be a response, a negative response in a bit higher rate in a shorter period of time. But after 1 month, everyone forget that, then they will start the same practice and the amount of consumption that we are doing every day. Right? So therefore, the time horizon that we discuss matters for the response. And this is one way of interpreting that. But the other way, like there are some seasonal demands. You take in Sri Lankan context, like banana during the New Year season. What happens? During the New Year season, banana prices getting significantly increased. How about the response? There will be at least 50% price hike for the increase in price for banana during New Year season. So what's happening to the quantity demand? Quantity demand is getting not negatively affected because it's the New Year season. So prices goes up, but still we demand at least the same amount or more than that. Usually it is more than that. And that is during the New Year season. The time that we are discussing is when that item getting like necessary. But in other time, like let's say month of August, when banana price increase, what happened to the quantity demanded? That will be significantly decreased because people will get into some other fruits like maybe melon or whatever available, right? Therefore, the time horizon that we discuss matters for the response. So simply what I wanted to say, depending on the type of the good, whether we are having a close substitute or not, and the definition of the market as well as the time horizon that we are discussing will make impact on the response. This is why we are having different types of demand elasticities. We should have one. So we are not having one type of price elasticity of demand because there will be different responses due to different reasons. Before learning about that, let's see in general what are the type of elasticities. So for that, I'm using demand. So then after that, we can use it for supply even. Right? So just to understand the concept of elasticity. So there are 5 types of elasticities, starting from perfect elasticity, elastic, unitary, inelastic, and perfectly inelastic. This is, as I mentioned previously, there will be different responses. So magnitude get changed, right? So the degree of the response will be changed. The price will be changed by 10%, quantity will change by 10%, price quantity demanded will be changed by, price will be changed by 5%, but there will be any change in the quantity demand. So therefore, there will be different responses for the change in its own price. With all this, we try to categorize them into these 5. Perfectly elastic, elastic, unitary, inelastic, and perfectly elastic. So let's first learn these 5 concepts and then again get back to price elasticity of demand later. So the first one, now this demand curve is a bit familiar to us. This is the demand curve we had in the previous class, right? So we have the negative relationship between its own price and quantity demand. And so price is given as P1, quantity is given as Q1. So that we have already learned. Now, can you remember we discussed about the change in quantity demand? So that is what we are going to do here because we are still working under price elasticity of demand. So what I do, I change the price. There will be a price increase. Price will be increased from P1 to P2, right? And quantity, what happened, according to the demand law, quantity should get decreased. So we had Q1 previously, when the price increased, quantity demanded decreased to Q2. Price increased to Q2, quantity decreased to Q2. Now let's assume these axes, they are drawn with the correct proportions. Right? The scale is similar. Therefore, we had this much change in price. This much change in price. What is the response? You see, response is this much. It's like this is 5% increase. 5% increase in quantity, increase in price. We increase the price by 5%, then here it is like 20% of decrease. Right? 5% of increase in price caused to have 20% of decrease in quantity demand. Then what do you think? What is the response? The response of quantity demanded, is it higher than the change in price or lesser than the change in price? In this case, it is very simple. The response of quantity demanded due to the change in its own price is higher. 5% of price change generated 20% of quantity demanded change. 5% of price increment decrease the quantity demanded more than 20%. Then we say this is elastic. The price elasticity of demand is elastic, or the response is elastic. Right? Response of price elasticity of quantity demanded due to change in price is elastic, which says your response will be much higher than the change in its own price. Any example for this? Elastic price elasticity of demand. Any example? Okay, if we take the example that I just previously mentioned about the bread, this relationship can be seen when we take the bread market. When bread prices increase by 5%, quantity demanded or the response of bread demanded will be, decreasing 20%. Therefore, when we take bread market, we are having elastic price elasticity of demand. And luxury good, yes. But when we term the luxury good, that goes with basically income. So to define whether it is a luxury or a necessity, we are using income. But anyway, that can be, because when we increase price for luxury good, there will be an increase, not decrease, because you want to show off, right? You are using a higher price good or service. But anyway, if you take bread, that would be an easier one for the newcomers. When we take bread, it is a good example, right? When bread prices increase by 5%, then quantity demanded will be decreased definitely by more than 5%. That is true these days. If you just visit to a bread shop or confectionery shop, they will be telling you no business at all. There is an increase in price, and that increase significantly change the quantity demand. Right. Then we have the second one, perfectly elastic. The one we discuss is the elastic. Right. Then the second will be the perfectly elastic. For that also we can use the same demand curve, but this time the demand curve is bit flatter. So it is parallel to the quantity axis, or it's a horizontal line given by D. So the shape of the demand curve will be a bit more flatter than we saw in the previous one. Here, what we say, virtually, theoretically, even without any change in price or a very smaller change in price, can make a huge change in the quantity demand. For example, in this graph, we are having P1 as the price and Q1 as the quantity. Right? So when price is P1, quantity demanded is Q1. But even without any change, there can be quantity. In real world, of course, we have no that much of examples, but we have a closer one. Without telling that quantity demanded, we say a very minimum, slight change, maybe one change. 1% change in price will have maybe 20%, 30%, or even more than. Then we say it is perfectly elastic. Virtually it is, without the change in price, quantity demanded can be changed. So for a very, very, very small change in price, response will be significantly high. Is there any examples for that? When we are having a very minimum change in price, quantity demanded will be affected hugely. Of course, not these days. If you go back to pre-pandemic situation, so in had two petrol suppliers. We have IOC and CPETCO. So CPETCO and IOC are having similar prices, right? So in sometimes CPETCO increase the price by 5 rupee. Maybe it is 0.05 percentage change in price. Less than 1% change in price. 5 rupees increment. What happens to the quantity demanded for IOC petrol? People will totally stop buying petrol from IOC. Maybe only not 5 rupee, maybe 1 rupee or 2 rupee change. Right? That decrease the quantity demanded significantly because people will not go and buy it from there. They will go and buy it from CPETCO because you get the same fuel from a lower price. So why to pay high? The rational customers, they all will get into CPETCO. Therefore, a slight change in price of IOC or CPETCO, when we have two companies, one company will change the price slightly, that may erode all their quantity demand. Therefore, we say that's a perfectly elastic, right? Response is so huge. Then, in some cases, we are having some price change, and that price change will make a similar impact on the quantity demanded. So, price increase by 10%, that will decrease the quantity demanded also by 10%. This is hypothetical, but closer examples will be there. When we increase price by 10%, quantity demanded also will be decreased by 10%. Then we say there is a unitary price elasticity of demand. So response will be similar to the change in its own price. The case is like this one. So price initially it was P1 and Q1, and price will be increased to P2. Then what has happened to the response? The quantity demanded decreased to Q2. And the proportion, if you look at the proportion here, both are similar. Let's say this is 10% change in price, that results 10% decrease in quantity demand. Then we say we are having unitary price elasticity of demand. Right? So in real world, we have no exact examples for them, but maybe when we are getting closer to this type, we can say we are having unitary price elasticity of demand, where the price increment 10%, quantity demand also will be changed by 10%. The fourth type of the elasticity is the inelastic. It is like the opposite of the elastic. For that also we can use the same demand curve. So we are having demand curve, downward sloping one, the usual familiar demand curve, and the initial price is P1, quantity is Q1. Now price increased by certain proportionate, but the response for that will be lesser than the change in price. For example, you can see here, price change may be like 20%. So this is a 20% price increment. 20% price increment will yield only 5% of change in quantity demand. So this will be 5%. And 20% increment in price will yield only 5% change in quantity demand. And the response is lower compared to the change in price. Then we say inelastic. In real world, we are having several examples for that. Any example for this one? This one we have a lot of examples. In real world, we see this. There will be a huge price increase in certain cases, but still we have a very minimal decrease in the quantity demand. The one we discussed, the fuel. Fuel price, yes. When fuel price increased by 4 times, 400%, but still we demand maybe like the decrease in quantity demand at like less than 10%, 10-15%. So therefore, we can say fuel is having inelastic price elasticity of demand. And the other one is rice. Rice may not, right? Of course, in another country, bread is a substitute for rice. Right? But in Sri Lanka, rice is not that like. Because culturally, we are consuming rice. When the rice price increase, response for rice maybe we are a bit closer to unitary. 10% increase in rice price, we will be having like 9-8% decrease in quantity demand. Right? Getting closer to unitary or inelastic. Because culturally, we need to consume rice. But your argument is correct. Since bread is there, when rice price increase, quantity demanded should be decreased significantly because we have a closer substitute. But in Sri Lanka, it is not a closer substitute because people do not like to consume rice because they feel like they did not eat. When they do not eat rice, they feel like they did not have their lunch, breakfast, or dinner. So therefore, in Sri Lanka, in other countries that is true, but in Sri Lanka, when rice price increase, people still consume rice. They will decrease the rice consumption, but not that much less. But fuel, of course. And if you take the case like alcohol, the one I mentioned previously, and alcohol prices significantly increase, but quantity demanded for alcohol will not be decreased that much. We will be having like usually 10 to 20% increase in rice price, the alcohol price, but quantity decrease will be like 1% or 2%. So therefore, we say when there is lesser response to a change in its own price, then we call it as inelastic price elasticity of demand. Then the final one, perfectly elastic, that is the opposite of inelastic. So we have a vertical demand curve. Instead of a horizontal one, now we are having a vertical demand curve. So this says our price is P1, quantity demanded is Q1, given the price as P1. Let's assume we increase the price. We increase the price to P2, but there will not be any change in quantity, virtually. Virtually, 100% change in its own price will not change the quantity demanded at all. We will be getting the similar amount of quantity demand. Then we call that perfectly elastic. The response is zero. If response is zero, then we say perfectly inelastic, where there is no any change in quantity demand. You can see this graph. Price is increased by this much. Let's say 20% increase in price. Quantity demanded will be the same. In real world, we are having also examples for that in certain type of goods. Any example for perfectly inelastic? There is no any change. When price change, there is no any change. Or price may change by 10%. Quantity demanded will change with the very, very small. Maybe the previous example, the rice may fit here, but not exactly. Matchbox. Yes, that is one good example. Matchbox, we don't have the substitute. But what about the lighters? Some of the classic examples, now we are getting outdated. Like now we are having lighters. Therefore, yes, when prices of matchbox increase, still we demand same. Or there will be a change. Presently, there will be a change, but classically, it's a good example. We need to light it something up. We need the matchbox. So therefore, matchbox prices will be doubled, but still we will demand at least similar level of demand there. Overall food price, exactly. That is a very good example for a definition of the market. We say food, and not rice, vegetable, or bread, or anything. We just say overall food price. When we take overall food price increase, quantity demanded will not be decreased because food is absolute necessity. Therefore, whatever the change in food price, we at least consume closer to that one. So that is happening in the present today, the present scenario in Sri Lanka. Food prices are significantly increased, but still people need the same amount of food. Very good. And the land is not that much. That depends again on income because it becomes a luxury. Right? To discuss about that, we need some other things to be discussed, like the income elasticity. Very good example. Here there are two people put the same example. That is salt. That is a classical one. Eh? Those who have done economics in your higher level, you may have heard that example. Salt. Salt is an example for a very good example. Even in foreign countries, we get the same example. That is a perfectly inelastic. Response will be zero. Now, take the price of salt today is 50 and we double it to 100. It's a 100% increment in salt price. But can there be any decrease in the salt consumption? There may be some minor, because if there were some wastage, those wastage will be minimized. But otherwise, the use of salt will not be getting affected. We will be using the same amount of salt. Right? Because no way, we have no substitute. We cannot eat without the salt level that we got used to. Therefore, whatever the change in price of salt, we will be demanding the same amount of quantity. Therefore, salt is a very good example, or we say the classical example for perfectly inelastic. Now, with these 5 types of, or the 5 degrees of price elasticity of demand, what I wanted to tell you, there will be different responses as we discussed in the definition. For some goods, when price changed by 5%, quantity demanded will be changed by 20%. We say elastic. And some goods, price will be changed by 5%, quantity demanded will be changed by 2%. So we say inelastic. For some cases, price will be changed by 10%, quantity demanded also will be changed by 10%. We say unitary. And for some cases, there will not be any change in price, but quantity can be changed with any amount. Then we say perfectly elastic. In some cases, there will be huge change in price, significant change in price, but that does not yield any change in quantity demand. So we call them as perfectly elastic. So there are different types of responses. Depending on the responses, we can say the type of the elasticity. So I hope you got that well. We can put all these in these graphs, so with the shape, because you may have noticed when we look at those different type of elasticities, different responses, our demand curve got changed. The shape of the demand curve got changed. In some cases, it was a horizontal line, very much flatter. In some cases, we had vertical, very much steeper. And some cases, it is bit flatter or bit steeper. Likewise, we had different shapes of the demand curve. Here, what I have done, I have put here all the shapes together. So from D1 to D5. So now you should be able to tell the elasticity just looking at the demand curve. Right? If you look at the demand curve, you should be able to guess the response and tell what is the elasticity of that given demand curve. For example, if we take D5, this one, D5, what is the expected type of price elasticity of demand? If this is the demand curve, D5, what is the price elasticity of demand in D5? Price elasticity of demand. One answer is there 0. If you put, of course, what I wanted to know is the perfectly elastic, inelastic, and that type of. But of course, we can put numeric values. So the answer is 0. Probably it is not 0. Inelastic. Yes, it is perfectly inelastic. Perfectly inelastic. Yes. Right. So the numeric value I will come later. So we can put next slide. We are putting everything together and see the response. It is perfectly inelastic. The response will be 0. Yeah, this is why you put 0. Response will be 0 because you see price will increase with any quantity demanded will not decrease at all. And now if you take D1, what is the price elasticity of demand with D1? Is it elastic, inelastic, or perfectly elastic? D1, yes. There are several answers. Yes, elastic, right? So that is elastic because the response is high. When you change your price by certain amount, if you are having a curve like D1, response will be high. So therefore, the rest you can easily say. If you are having like D3, it will be a unitary. And if it is D4, then it will be inelastic. And D5, it is perfectly inelastic. In A level, we learn all this and we don't agree with D3. D3 is usually taken as a unitary, but there will be a bit different if you are taking that as unitary. So that we will be discussing later, but for the moment, just remember, these type of degrees of elasticities we can understand just by looking at the demand curve, and you should be able to do that. And even in the final exam, we will be having this kind of a graph.